Hi, my name is Baylor Johnson, and this is my presentation on Montana Chinese immigration. Today we'll be going over three topics, mainly the Chinese immigration to the United States, covering the Immigration and the Chinese Exclusion Act. Secondly, the immigration to Montana and the work available in Montana. And then thirdly, the life in Montana and the living conditions of which the Chinese had to live through. The Chinese immigration to the United States. In the early 1800s, many Chinese found their way to California for a couple of different reasons. One, the economic situation in China was really, really bad. The Chinese really couldn't get work in China as there was too much population and not enough jobs. So that drove them to the US so that they could have chances of a new job. The second really was the finding of gold in both California and in Montana. Those two gold rushes are really the main reasons that the Chinese moved to the States. And when they got here, the Chinese were such effective workers that one governor in San Francisco even said and referred to the Chinese as the most desirable of our adopted citizens because they were so efficient and they were the best workers that the gold mining industry really had. They were so good that they outclassed all the other laborers in the industry, and this kind of made it so that the white population no longer wanted the Chinese to be able to come in to the state and able to take over their jobs and do it more efficiently than they could. This led to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This was really just a way to stop any more Chinese from making their way into the States. It was supposed to last 10 years, but at the end of the 10 years, the Geary Act was passed following, and it added another 10 years of the Chinese ban. It also added stipulations where the Chinese citizens, or not really citizens, in the States had to carry registration, and if they were ever caught without it, they could be deported or imprisoned and then did hard labor for however long until they were then deported. The immigration in Montana, um, Montana was really founded on the labor of immigrants, mostly the Irish, the Japanese, and the Chinese. They came to Montana as they saw it as an opportunity. They could get work here that they couldn't get in China or any other place in the States, really. But what came with the jobs was that the jobs weren't very great, and there was a hierarchy that of people that could get the jobs, and the more desirable jobs never ended up in Chinese hands. This comes to the work of the Chinese. It was really mainly three different categories. There was the railroad construction, which was really one of the least desirable jobs because it was incredibly dangerous. It was incredibly hard to do, really labor intensive, and it was dangerous because one of the main jobs in the railroad construction was using dynamite to blow up mountains and clear way for the track to then be laid down, which was also done by the Chinese. The Chinese made up for about 80 to 90% of the workers in the railroad industry, and the other 10 to 20% were mostly Irish. And then the second main industry, the gold mining industry, was another one of the bigger jobs for the Chinese in the States. But what isn't here, or what is here, is that the Chinese were given really, really poor land to work on, and that wasn't very lucrative in the gold. And then the third category is the unfavorable jobs, like laundromats, cooks, servants, and part-time workers. These were just like the jobs that the white people, the white population, didn't want to do themselves, so they kind of just pushed it on to the minorities. And then the treatment of the Chinese in Montana. It was said in our textbook that the whites tolerated the Chinese only so far as they did the menial work. It did not pose an economic threat. This just further supports the Work for Chinese slide that I have, where they just had the really bad jobs that no one wanted. And then also the Chinese were perceived as like the lowest form of human life. They were like they were seen as something that was just they didn't want them here other than for the really, really bad jobs that they didn't want to do themselves. And then companies also really targeted the Chinese, and they only hired the Chinese for some jobs, such as the railroad, where they knew that they could pay them pretty much dirt for one of the hardest jobs in Montana. And then the really, really bad part of their treatment in Montana was how unjust the law was to them. This is really peaking with the Chinese Exclusion Act, where they banned entrance for an entire race to come into the states, and then also the following Geary Act that I mentioned that put regulations on them that were really, really strict, and if you broke it, it was done. You were out of the states. And then there was also many, many cases of unjust arrests from that unjust arrests that went to the high courts, and it was really, really, really bad. One case that I found was someone was trying to pay the bail of someone that was wrongly arrested, and then the person running the jail took that as a bribe to release them, so they arrested them too, and then someone else came to try to get them out, and they arrested them too. It's just a really bad situation for any Chinese involved during or involved in the law at all. And then also in the majority of court cases that went to high courts, it was almost a 70 or 80% that was not in favor of the Chinese involved. These are some of the sources I used. Thank you very much.